The balance of power is a crucial concept in realist theory. And here I just want to make 2 points about the balance of power to add to what's in our textbook. One is about this question of the balance as an automatic result versus as a policy. And the other is how balance of power theory contrasts with a focus on hegemony. So first of all, when everyone strives to be the most powerful, no one succeeds, right? That's the sort of basic logic of balance of power theory. And in that sense, the balance of power is a result of the system, not of the state policy, right? Nobody wants there to be a balance. We all want to dominate. But when everybody tries to dominate, the result is balance. And so that's a crucial point where it's the system, the interaction of the actors causes that result, not the intentions of the actors themselves. All right. There is a lot of conversation and not only in realist theory, but especially when realists start to make recommendations for what states should do about the balance of power as a policy. And that's especially true reading the history books. This is this idea that states make it a matter of their policy to make sure that no single state dominates, right? What this usually involves is allying against whoever the most potentially dominant state is. So we've talked already about the concert of Europe, right? And the idea was to prevent a country like Napoleonic France from ever getting in a position again where it could threaten to take over all of Europe. Another great example of this kind of logic is the alliance between the US and Great Britain on one hand and the Soviet Union on the other to fight against Nazi Germany. The US and Britain hated the Soviet Union because it was communist and for a lot of reasons. And the Soviets hated the British and Americans because they were the leaders of global capitalism, but it didn't matter, right? They wanted to keep Germany from taking over Europe. They had this common cause. So that's the balance of power as a policy. And another point that balance of power theorists sometimes make is that states should, and I want to stress should because now they're making a normative statement, should refrain from trying to dominate because that, they argue, unbalances the system and makes war more likely. And so you've seen some people from a realist perspective criticizing the United States in the post-Cold War years from trying to become too dominant because the argument is that that naturally threatens others and leads to all sorts of problems. A completely different issue that we want to raise about balance of power theory is that balance of power theory is not the only realist theory, right? Realism is a general approach. And there's a different and really contradictory realist set of a realist theory that focuses on hegemony. Hegemony is just a synonym for dominance, right? So we're academics, right? Why use a simple word when a complicated, unfamiliar one will do? Many realists and some historians see hegemony as normal rather than balance being normal. So whereas balance of power theorists look back at history and see a history of balance in war happening when the balance gets threatened or disrupted, hegemonic stability theory, as it's called, sees history as a succession of hegemonies and war happening when hegemony erodes or is threatened. Right? So in hegemonic stability theory, we had peace when the British were dominant in the 19th century, or when the US was dominant after World War II, or in earlier periods there were other dominant powers. So in this perspective, as hegemony erodes, this hegemonic war becomes more likely. This view sees World War I as being caused by, right, the rise of Germany and the fact that that threatened British hegemony. And that was a new contest for hegemony, which Britain won, of course, or Germany certainly lost. From this perspective, right, this question is raised now: if the U.S. has been the dominant power for the last several decades, what is the impact of the rise of China? And from this perspective, we would expect that as China rises, the likelihood of a global war becomes increased as U.S. hegemony declines. We're not going to sort that out today, but the crucial point to make is that this is a different notion of what happens under the same realist assumptions as balance of power theory. So I want to stress this. Balance of power theory and hegemony, or hegemonic stability theory, have opposite predictions of what causes war and peace. One sees peace being caused by a balance, the other sees peace being caused by hegemony or dominance. One sees war occurring when the balance of power erodes and one state becomes too powerful. The other sees war happening when dominance erodes and states become more equal in power. Following from that opposite interpretation, they have opposite interpretations of history, and I mentioned interpretations of World War I as simply one example. So if these theories have these contrasting understandings, how can we call them both realist theories? And the reason that we do that is because they are both theories that say international politics is driven by the distribution of power in an environment in which security is scarce, and states are driven by their own conception of their self-interest and their need for survival rather than anything else. In that sense, these are both realist theories, but it's important for us to be clear at any given time that we're reading realist theory or applying realist theory, that we're clear about which version of realist theory we're dealing with. Most of the time, what we're going to be hearing about and reading is balance of power theory. But as I pointed out in my case of China and the US, when people talk about the rise of China these days and the threat of conflict, whether they mention it or not, they're implicitly applying hegemonic stability theory. So the question that we want to ask then is, what do you think? Which version of realism best explains what's going on in international politics?